Welcome to the Pod, the Orders of Magnitude podcast with your hosts, Acton and George.
Explore our writings and other episodes at oompod.substack.com. That's oompod.substack.com. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to episode 22. At long last, we're back. Love in the ruins. People, place, and politics in one messy world. We read for today's podcast, Love in the Ruins, The Adventures of a Bad Catholic Near the End of the World by Walker Percy, which he wrote between 1967 and 1970, was published in May of 1971. So we're doing a novel. We're going to put a lot of love on this novel in this episode. But first, we're going to talk about the demise of reading. I think the age of mass literacy that defined Western culture for, say, the last 200 years is kind of over.
Yep.
Reading as a central source of self-improvement and entertainment has been displaced. And barring some sort of collapse of the internet is probably not coming back. In fact, the internet seems to be just turning into an AI crazy world. So really. So what does it mean to be a reader in a time where the vast majority of people you encounter, even so-called educated people, don't read?
That is a great question. I mean, it's depressing to think about, but it's honest, because I believe that reading is, like we've talked about before, a practice that creates this whole inner world inside of you. Like reading opens up this space and then it fills it with other people. So if you read nonfiction, then you've got other people's ideas and arguments rattling around inside of you. And if you read fiction, then you've got characters and their dialogue and their idiosyncrasies and their virtues and sins and relationships all muddling around inside of you. And reading makes you full of possible ways of seeing the world and of being in the world, so that reading can make you humble, and I think it can make you flexible and deep. And so to be a reader in a world where most people don't read anymore, I just think the readers are going to sniff each other out. Like I'm pretty sure I can tell, like when talking with someone, if they are this kind of reader or not. And not because they're dropping book titles or authors' names, but because you can tell if someone has created this rich, verbal, imaginative space inside of themselves. And there's certainly maybe other ways to create that space and that depth. I'm not sure what that would be. I mean, maybe prayer, but I know that reading definitely does that. And it shows up in the way people talk and the way that they think. And so I expect readers will find one another amidst kind of the screen-addled crowds, and they're still going to form friendships. And I think readers will do their best to pass it on to their children. But I expect that reading is going to go the way of cursive, or of playing an instrument yourself, or of like regional dialects of English. Reading, it takes a deep love of the habit and the history of reading to maintain it. And I think it will survive in particular niches, probably in certain families. And I wonder if reading for pleasure might become an aristocratic inheritance, like the kind of thing that only the lucky few are going to get from their parents in the cradle. And everyone else will just get screens plus that, semi-functional literacy that you get in school, but without the heart, like without the personal transformation. So everyone's still going to be able to read in the sense of decipher text for school, for recipes, for road signs, for social media, that kind of thing. But we're talking about reading books that take you a long time to get through. And so all of that makes me wonder, will readers eventually become problematic for non-readers? Like irritating, unintelligible, even threatening? And I definitely believe reading is a vaccine against ideology and certainty, because the more you read, the more you know how much you don't know and how complex the world and its problems are. And I can imagine a world where deep readers sound increasingly unintelligible to non-readers, because more and more of the common cultural references are going to be lost, like from the Bible and Greek mythology and Shakespeare, like all the heavy hitters. And this is happening already. And do you remember a few months ago, I sent you that video of this short interaction between two actors? One was the wonderful seasoned matriarch Emma Thompson, and the other is pretty little Timothée Chalamet. And they're talking about his hair and how for the movie Dune, he had these gorgeous long curly locks. And then for the next movie, he had to buzz it all off really short. And Thompson makes a joke about Samson getting his hair cut off by Delilah and losing his power, right? It's this classic story from the book of Judges in the Hebrew Bible. And Chalamet's completely befuddled. He's like, I have no clue what you're talking about. And she grabs his hand and says, I'm going to take you for margaritas after this, and I'll tell you lots of stories about hair. And it was just this shocking moment to me of public illiteracy and of the difference between the generations. So she's in her 60s probably, and he's in his 20s. And I think moments of, I have no clue what you're talking about, are just going to get more and more common.
That is scary.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about this question is that it makes me think of Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, which you read recently, where all the books are illegal because they can make people feel unpleasant, uncomfortable feelings. And everybody, prefers the fake flat world of the screen that makes you happy instead of the provocative depths of the book. And so all the books are burned. And the handful of straggling survivors and fugitives at the end of that story, they've memorized and internalized these books that for the most part don't really exist anymore as whole readable artifacts. And the only place those books live now is literally inside another person. And that has this terrifying monkish quality to the end of that book, where civilization is being kept alive inside the hearts and minds of just a few people, like during a dark age, but they're holding it in trust for the future. And so when I think about the future being a post-literate one where hardly anyone reads, I feel kind of a stubborn, old school feistiness about my own intention to keep reading and to make sure that my children, and if I have grandchildren someday, to make sure that they're all thoroughly bookish people.
I think the best we can hope for is to model and promote the idea of a reading remnant. And maybe we've been thinking about it the wrong way around. Like maybe the mass literacy is the anomaly and the reading remnant, books in a monastery, books kept alive in the dark ages, maybe that's the norm historically. Like maybe we've been misled to think what the norm is. But of course, that's scary to contemplate because our democracy kind of depended
based on that.
based on, a large number of people being able to think calmly and critically and nuancedly. And so, if we go into a position where thoughtful readers are a teeny tiny minority, then that minority is going to be beholden to the politics of the masses who do not read.
Yeah.
And that could pose some problems.
Yes.
I think to be optimistic about some sort of remnant surviving is possible. What context that remnant lives in, that can get pretty dark. And we're not just talking about readers in a technical sense. When we talk about readers, we're kind of talking about sharers of a specific culture that we've come to think of as transmissible by reading. We're talking about the heavy hitters, right? We're talking about, and I've said this before, we're talking about how really the core texts of the West shape our perception. And I think, as a nation, we would all have a totally different understanding of Trump had everyone had an education where they were forced to make their way through the Book of Judges or Samuel or Kings. And, they not only would they know who Samson was, they'd also have this idea. They'd have this very different pre-modern idea of authority.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we would all agree on everything. That's a kind of fantasy. But we would have certainly a different understanding, I think, of power and progress.
Yeah.
It's not just that people aren't reading for fun. We'll say more about that. It's that people aren't getting these important pre-modern ideas anymore. It's not that we don't have a shared, it's partly that we don't have a shared culture, but it's also that the actual content of what that shared culture used to say about power and authority. We're in this sort of new dangerous zone. And as I said, maybe it is true. Certainly it is true from the pre-modern standpoint that this sort of 80 years of post-World War II peace is anomalous. And all civilizations, that's one of the things, another thing you get if you read history, you really get this sense that all human creations, civilizations, cities, they all end.
Yeah.
And it's not possible to really get your head around in a pragmatic sense, but in a historical literary sense, it's right there accessible.
Exactly.
We're not just losing the individual positive attributes that reading good literature promotes. And we're going to talk a lot more about how novels, they inculcate moral nuance, but we're also losing that sort of shared moral and historical context, the one that has made our fragile experimental democracy doable for 250 years, which is a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
From historical standards, right? We can't get at the problem of our shared moral context just by promoting, reading modern pulp fiction instead of scrolling. That switch isn't going to help. On some level, we can't see the forest for the trees because, yes, there's no doubt that replacing a childhood of play with a childhood of screens is terrible. But that specific insult to children's mental and moral development has taken place within a larger, longer shift away from the moral tradition that our best literature, sacred and secular, reflects and perpetuates. So if the screens mean that most children really don't read anymore, That's one thing. But if we could get them off the screens and back into books, what are they going to read?
Yeah. What kind of books?
What kind of books? Are they going to know who Samson is or not? So I've had a lot of so-called years of education, and, I really wish I'd been forced to read more of the Western literary canon, especially the Bible, especially the Hebrew Bible. And I don't advocate this from a religious angle. I mean, I want children to read the Bible in school as tradition, as literature, as a kind of history, and that's it. And that's, I promise you, the opposite of the movement to bring prayer back in school. I think Christian nationalists who advocate for prayer in school are actually hurting their own cause, because really the value of these texts is, as we've seen them in our own American history, is really as a foundational tool for civic formation and participation. What really matters about the Bible, I think, socially speaking, meaning how it functions as a core foundation of the West, is the shared context. It's knowing the same stories.
Right.
Not having a place where religion is explicit, and not necessarily, and certainly not sharing that religious expression. I mean, we are the epitome of the country that managed to say that doesn't matter how you express it, go off and have your own church. No,
right.
The state won't promote one thing over the other.
The tolerance. Everything
that we think of as Westerners as ours started with these heavy hitting texts, the Bible and the Greek texts and everything that came out of, sorting out that marriage between sort of our secular and our sacred inheritance. And you really get a sense of this when you read books by people who have absorbed this Western culture, and it just comes out through their pores.
Yeah.
And Walker Percy is amazing at it. I used the Library of America edition of Percy's novels, and it has notes. And so you can turn to the back and see all the cultural references that they glossed for you, because they know that you need it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he just has so much of the West that he just deploys. It's the self-referentiality. It's the fact that he's drawing on this tradition that makes his book so rich. Reading and great writing are connected. So if you lose one, you lose the other. A disclaimer before we begin: it's like really impossible to do this novel justice because it's so long, it's so dense, it's so complicated. But I really hope that we can just convince one random listener to go read this book, because it really is a wonderful experience of reading. The effort it takes to understand it is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
A book like Love in the Ruins takes time to read and even more time to digest. So we will betray it by summarizing it, but hopefully we'll inspire someone to read it. And I think it's worth thinking about how everything that reading a novel is, AI is not. AI's main selling point is based on this idea that, you don't have to do the work, I'll do the work for you. In the context of a novel or moral formation or any kind of nuanced activity, that's a destructive act.
Yeah.
To be like, I'll summarize it for you.
It's theft. and you might feel like, oh, good, it's giving something to me. It's not. It's taking an experience from you.
Yeah. The joy of reading is not informational. To return to one of our favorite contrasts, reading is dispositional, not propositional.
Exactly.
We should be fearing for our cultural lives when the so-called elites of our society promote the takeover of all interactions by processes that do not include actual human thought or speech or words. AI imitates these things, but it's not doing it. It's not reading. It's not thinking. It's not conversing. It's not sympathizing. And people who know what reading is and know what good literature is will be less fooled by this idea that AI is doing those things.
It makes me wonder if a person who hasn't already become a reader will be able to recognize slop as slop.
Yeah, no, I think that's the great worry. I had my first conversation because Alexa got upgraded, the Amazon assistant.
Oh boy.
It's amusing, but it's frightening. The only real choice you have is to unplug it. There's no other choices.
So she was spying on you and inserted herself.
Yeah. I mean, it's partly just the way that they feel, they sound like they're conversing with you. And it's also just the fact that that everything you say is being monitored and fed back into the machine.
Yeah.
It's convenient to have a timer you can talk to. Like, Alexa, set a timer for 2 minutes. That's super neat. That's super fun. Super convenient. But that is wow. You're selling your soul because you could set a timer without touching a device. Ooh, right. Wow. You have a low cost soul there.
Yeah. Go analog to save your soul.
Didn't Faust get at least a little more than that?
Yeah. Oh, man.
So I've unplugged our Alexa because, like, it's not okay.
No.
I mean, there's a part of me that wants to sort of try to put like a rosy, because you can treat it as a game. You could treat it as a genre of, like, just like reality television, a certain genre of television. You could sort of think talking to an AI could be kind of a ludic. You could treat it in a ludic way. But the problem is that it doesn't exist as a game, because a game shouldn't be connected to like everything else in the world and the life of profit and advertising. And
you can put a game away. A game has an ending.
Right.
But this is always there, always
doesn't have
listening.
any outside profit directed large corporations.
And a game has rules. And that's the thing with the hiddenness of these technologies and what they're doing in the algorithms. You don't know what the rules are. You're playing with it, and it is very much playing with you. But it's got other rules that you don't have access to, and it's doing things that you don't know. And so it's just inherently and unfair. It's the cadre of programmers who are doing all of those thousands of people who are working it against little old you, and so it's not really a fair match.
The idea that a machine can talk to you as if it's a human, there's undoubtedly some important applications for that. Speech to text technology has been around for a long time. I mean, these early systems like, press or say 3 for, those have been around a long time. And certainly that technology is useful, but it's a different kind of sort of monetization and capture and surveillance of human imagination and human participation. So I'm just going to have to buy a real timer now with buttons.
That's right. You want a tool that you can use that is not simultaneously using you. Let's move to Love in the Ruins. So here's the elevator pitch on this book. And as we already said, summary is a little too difficult. We're not going to attempt that, but we should at least introduce the main character and his context. So the book is a first-person narrative told by Dr. Thomas More, who is simultaneously a psychiatrist and an outpatient of the same mental institution in a bayou town called Paradise in Louisiana. And the novel is set in an imagined dystopian future relative to 1971 of 1983. So Paradise, like many places in the American South, has a mix of whites and blacks. And Paradise Estates, where Moore lives, is a rare place where whites of both new extremist political parties that have replaced the now dead Republican and Democratic parties still live relatively amicably side by side. But trouble is brewing. Its adjacent swamps have been occupied by Bantus, which is the name adopted by a radical group of violent black separatists. In addition, Moore has pressing personal problems. He's a lapsed Catholic, he drinks way too much, and he lusts after 3 women at once. But he's also kind of an idealist. He's a doctor, he's a scientist, and he's created a device which he calls the, quote, ontological lapsometer, lapse referring to the fall. And it's a stethoscope of the human spirit, which supposedly measures, disorders of the human soul caused by the split between man's animal and angel aspects. So kind of like the bestial embodied part of man, and then what he calls kind of the abstracted part of man, just kind of the mental component. So Moore is not completely a reliable narrator, but that makes the story all the more interesting because then you get to puzzle over what is real and what's maybe just in his head, and then you get to jump around wildly with him between the present and the past. So all the quotes that we'll share here are in the voice of and from the perspective of Moore. And I'll also add, he's named after the martyr St. Thomas More, who was beheaded by Henry VIII of England. And our Moore in the novel has a relationship with his namesake in the book that's quite beautiful. It's very, very Catholic. So hopefully that's just enough detail to orient people who've never heard of the book before. And last thing, as soon as I started reading this, Jordan Peterson was the person who took on Moore's role in my imagination. Like I always try to, have a movie of the book I'm reading going in my head, right? Like what they look like, what people sound like, right? And so as soon as I started reading, there was a younger version of Jordan Peterson, with the Kermit voice, kind of the overwhelmed psychiatrist who's kooky but lovable, but it's really kind of a mess, but you like him.
It's cute.
And that really worked for me all the way through.
Okay, so we're going to frame our discussion with the arc that the book sort of traces chronologically. It starts off on July 4th, and then it ends up with the epilogue 5 years later at Christmas. So July 4th starts in a bunker with Moore contemplating a catastrophe, one that he might well survive, at an abandoned Howard Johnson motel with his 3 women, each in 3 different rooms, each of whom he fancies.
Mhm.
And then Christmas 5 years later, when the world in fact does not end, he's gone from bunker to bed, from 3 women to 1, and he's gone back to church. So for Moore personally, it really is a story of redemption. Politically, it's more complicated, and we'll get to that. I think what is most thought-provoking and rewarding about this novel is that it ends with our protagonist physically focused on his wife and family, his home. So this is the last, 100 or so words of the novel. It's Moore narrating a scene with his wife, Ellen. She puts the spoon down, and I put her down on her new $600 bed. To bed we go for a long winter's nap, twined about each other as the ivy twineth, not under a bush or in a car or on the floor or any such humbug as marked the past peculiar years of Christendom, but at home in bed where all good folk belong.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear, right? At home in bed where all good folk belong. So this really is a triumph for Moore. The entire novel, he's been trying to go home again, I think, is one way to really look at the arc. And so at this ending, you understand why there's been so much emphasis placed on describing Moore's former house in Paradise Estates, because you were seeing a man in a house that was not a home and how it really unraveled him. And one of the ways that you see this unraveling is the fact that Moore notes these climbing vines everywhere. And because, a home means a place set apart by human labor. And Moore, like so many others in Paradise, is no longer at home in this sense. There's this sense of sort of letting things rot where they are. Things break. There's this great line where, the whole decline of America is because nobody wanted to be a repairman anymore.
Yes. That's a great line. Yeah.
Because people just when things break, they just let them,
just fall apart.
Rot in place.
Yeah.
So where humans have withdrawn or given up, nature is taking over again. And at the end of the novel, that's what makes it so remarkable that Moore does have a home again. And so you see this impersonal, threatening creep of uncontrolled plant life, all this sort of twining around as a negative.
Mm-hmm.
Now the language is reusing that word in a positive, right? It's this one flesh-making intertwining of 2 bodies, his and his wife's. So it's a fruitful, not a fearful twining. He's got 2 children now. And these twined bodies in bed signals a restoration, one that will seem all the more radical once we, give you more details on where the $600 bed is actually located. But, hats off to Percy for fearlessly describing the life of a sinner and this messy, meaningful redemption. Right? That's a good elevator pitch, right? A messy, meaningful redemption.
Yes.
At the end of the world.
Exactly.
Or not.
Yeah, and it's great that your intro to the book is the last 2 sentences of the book. It's a truly beautiful and satisfying ending. And there's poetry in it. There's symbolism in it. And I just want to briefly add to your elevator pitch on the book 2 things that were in my mind immediately after I finished reading it. The first was that it made me laugh out loud multiple times. And I can't think of the last novel that has really made me bust a seam like that. And it did that in these short, snappy scenes of dialogue that reminded me a lot of Monty Python. It was very enjoyable. So that was a delight. I was not expecting to be that tickled. And the second thing I came away with was how striking it is the way that Percy's satire through the eyes of Thomas More skewers every single person in the story and every single group in the story. So he makes fun of men and women, of whites and blacks, Southerners and Midwesterners, Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, conservatives and liberals, college students and professors and doctors, psychologists, scientists, rich people and poor people, hippies and priests, political radicals and racists. Everyone ends up looking ridiculous, but believably ridiculous. And then that makes everyone forgivable. Because when humor is deployed against a particular group who's singled out for mockery, while some other group or groups are protected classes who are kind of untouchable, then I think there's a real problem with that. But when everyone comes under fire equally, then mockery is no longer a weapon, but it's a tool for communion. And this kind of universal parody that Walker Percy deploys, it becomes a universal grace. And the laughter is like a kind of absolution because no one is exempt. And so it even occurred to me to wonder, what if I was put into this book as a character? What is it about me and my life, my social class or my personality or group affiliations that kind of smells faintly ridiculous? What about me would get picked out and accentuated and turned into a caricature? Like, I don't know if you've ever had like a caricature drawn of you by someone, but it's always, I've had that once or twice before. It's always interesting to know what is the feature that they pick out and like make big.
Magnify, yeah.
And yeah, magnify
Exaggerate,
and
I
make
guess we should
ridiculous.
say.
Yeah.
Character.
Right.
The character, your character.
And so a caricature is simultaneously false and true. I think it's useful information to know that about yourself if you can allow yourself to be caricatured. And that's a powerful thing about novels. Like, you can put yourself in there as a character and then ask, what about me would other people chuckle over? You know, and it helps you to learn to stop being so precious and puritanical about yourself and your own importance.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous point. This idea that a novel inoculates you against a kind of simplified self-righteousness. And Percy does a really good job. There's a lot of broad strokes kind of characterization of what's happened because he's sketching this dystopian world, right? But ultimately, there is no character that is just a flat representation because they're all in. It's because of that locality. We'll talk more about this as we go, but it's because they interact with each other always as people.
Yes, in that place.
I mean, that is sort of the lesson. Because if it was just this broad strokes, if there were no interaction on the human level, then there wouldn't be a novel. And that's true about our real lives. But the media we consume, we actually want to actually interact with people as if they were just flat, two-dimensional political representations. But it's not true. When you meet someone in real life, regardless of what you think of maybe the institution they belong to, they're not that.
No, they're a real person when you are faced with the option of holding the door open for their body or not.
Right.
Or you seeing, like how they move. Oh, look, they've got a limp. They must be in pain. Or how they smell, or how the tone of their voice, like all these little very human, very embodied things. You realize their uniqueness and their particularity, and that they're not just a symbol of some idea. They are a particular concrete person in time.
Right. The more and more interactions we have that are disembodied, just with sort of people as representatives of opinions.
Yes. Ooh.
It gets
bad.
It just exacerbates that tendency to sort of just to put everything under an umbrella, like to dismiss an institution. And we're all guilty of this. It'd be like, oh, the schools are so woke now. But it's like you have to resist that sort of unknowing claim to know.
Right.
Because every interaction you have with an institution is going to be through a specific person or people.
Mm-hmm.
And
you have to be open to being surprised and to being in the moment with that person.
Right. And I think a lot of what Percy is grappling with in this novel is how that sort of like temptation to sort of, take that 50,000 foot view and say, this whole thing is about this one thing. In the bunker, he's really wondering, like, can this, because he's facing, this potential disaster. It's kind of like a political apocalypse kind of setting where, there's always a threat of violence and there's all these separatists and it's just like it's a very chaotic, fragile situation. And he really is thinking, the United States it's not workable. Extreme political discourse has that tendency to be like,
yes,
this is the one thing that's wrong. And
that's right. The simplicity of punditry,
exactly.
Of finding the one problem. Yeah. So this first quote, takes place on July 4th in the bunker in a very potentially combustible moment.
So I'm going to go right into the quote, but if I guess I feel obliged to issue a small trigger warning, I am going to use the so-called N-word in this quote. But that's all I wanted. That's all I'm going to say about it. So this is your chance to turn it off if that's going to be a problem. I'm thinking most of our listeners know that we don't do censorship, so I'm just going to go right in. All right. The poor USA, even now, late as it is, nobody can really believe that it didn't work after all. The USA didn't work. Is it even possible that from the beginning it never did work? That the thing always had a flaw in it, a place where it would shear, and that all this time we were not really different from Ecuador and Bosnia-Herzegovina, just richer? Moon Mullins, this is me again, he's the golf course groundskeeper, landlord for the shacks in Happy Hollow, and not on, shall we say, the unracist side of things. Moon Mullins blames it on the niggers. Was it the nigger business from the beginning? What a bad joke. God saying, here it is, the new Eden, and it is yours because you're the apple of my eye, because you, the lordly Westerners, the fierce Caucasian Gentile Visigoths, believed in me and in the outlandish Jewish event, even though you were nowhere near it and had to hear the news of it from strangers. But you believed, and so I gave it all to you, gave you Israel and Greece and science and art and the lordship of the earth, and finally even gave you the new world that I blessed for you. And all you had to do was pass one little test, which was surely child's play for you because you had already passed the big one. One little test. Here's a helpless man in Africa. All you have to do is not violate him. That's all. One little test. You flunk. God, was it always the nigger business now, just as in 1883, 1783, 1683? And hasn't it always been that ever since the first tough, God-believing, Christ-haunted, cunning, violent, rapacious, Visigoth Western Gentile first set foot here with the first black man, the one willing to risk everything, take all or lose all, the other willing just to wait and outlast because once he was violated, all he had to do was wait because sooner or later, the first would wake up and know that he had flunked, had proved a liar where he lived, and no man can live with that. And sooner or later, the lordly Visigoth Western Gentile Christian Americans would have to falter, fall out, turn upon themselves like scorpions in a bottle.
Woo!
Woo! So we're going to do some old school close reading on this rich passage, but wow. Percy is a fantastic writer. That's worth saying first.
Yeah.
It's a breathtaking passage. All right, let's do this. A few points. Point number 1, the America could fail concept. We know this was important to Percy because he talked about it at the Publishers Society when he gave a speech before the book was published. What I really wanted to do, I guess, he said in this speech, was call a bluff, for it has often seemed to me that much of the violence and alienation of today can be traced to a secret and paradoxical conviction that America is immovable and indestructible. Hence the acts of desperation. Blowing up a building is, after all, a nutty thing to do. The fact is that America is not immovable and indestructible. So I think this is very timely. I mean, maybe we don't have quite the political violence that the late 60s and early 70s would exhibit, but I think more people are worried about America's future than were perhaps, 10 or 20 years ago, right? But maybe it's true also that there's always been a segment of American society that thinks the game is up. Maybe the period of American paranoia about no more America is kind of old news.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely lean towards being more sanguine about America, but probably just that's because of my personality. I've always been a glass half full kind of girl. But also because America has always been a land of apocalypticism. Christ can return any day now. It's the end of the world, the rapture, like even all the UFO abduction cults. Like we have a Chicken Little default mode that the sky is falling. We're always talking about ourselves that way. And so if it's always an emergency, then it's never an emergency. And I think the 24-hour news cycle has so amped us all into feeling like America is coming apart at the seams. Like if you watch too many videos of Minneapolis or if you watch old replays of January 6th, then you're going to feel like America is very movable and destructible, like it's already coming apart. The algorithm will feed me on YouTube all kinds of, Civil War is right around the corner, that kind of thing all the time. But if you get off social media and you go outside, as long as you don't actually live in Minneapolis right now, America's not actually falling apart in many, many places. I'd probably say in most places. And you know how when you hear a car alarm, it doesn't really occur to you that the car is being stolen. It's like, something else. They forgot their keys, So that's how I feel about kind of the America doomsday language. Like I hear it too often and too loud, kind of for too long for it to have a meaning for me now. I think Percy is right that America is breakable, but I kind of don't think we would go out with a bang. I think we were just going to have one civil war. We had that, and we know how awful it was. I don't think we're going to do that again. I think we're more likely to go out with a whimper through demographic collapse and then ideological sorting into red and blue states that are kind of glad to be rid of one another. I don't think we're going to kill each other again. I think we'll just avoid each other. That's my guess.
It's an interesting lesson to think that this temptation, maybe it is totally magnified by social media, but it's also a magnification of something that has always been there.
Right. And he's talking about the part that's always been there. Yeah.
So here's another sort of tie in to something we recognize from our own age. I mean, the first thing I thought of when he's talking about that it's all about slavery is the 1619 Project,
exactly.
Which basically asserted, albeit in a much more morally certain, less nuanced way, that is the sort of core of America. Percy purposely situates this musing of Moore at the peak sort of tension point of the novel.
Yes.
Because right before what could be a very serious disaster. Like, this is at the peak of his anxiety. So that's interesting, right? It's the peak anxiety that prompts the most sort of damning, overarching historical simplification statement.
Yes.
That context is important, right? Because this passage is one reason why a good novel is such a superior way to metabolize and mull over big moral quandaries. The context can position your relationship to the passage, but also he's not bounded with this need to be objective. You know, it gives us permission to be kind of confused and contradictory and conflicted because we can think about it through this character under duress. So we can both relate to and dispute the historical reductionism of one little test. Here's a helpless man in Africa. All you have to do is not violate him. You know, we don't have to reduce our responses to, you know, this is totally true or this is totally false. We can indulge, you know, a little more complexity, a little more subtlety. Also, maybe if we don't read novels, we lose this. Maybe that's one of the reasons why our politics become so polarized, because we lose the context that allows you to have some moral subtlety, right? The attitude that Percy considers here through the character Moore, namely that America is defined by its adoption of racialized chattel slavery, is, you know, now we do have a lot of fora in which this is asserted point blank as dogma. Like, this is like a certain part of the progressive left treats this as truth. And it promotes this ideology that all disparities between groups are at root the products of, you know, to use some of the lingo, white power over black bodies. The same idea as the 1619 Project, you know, we see it in this passage, but in Percy's context, there's room to ask yourself, what is oversimplified?
Right. The fact that the idea is coming in the context of a novel with a flawed but likable character saying the unsayable, who gets some things right and some things wrong. That's then an invitation to talk about the moral complexity and kind of fumble your way towards a measured opinion. And like I said earlier, you know, because the whole tale is saturated with humor, that means it's also saturated with grace. And so in the context of this story, you can be profoundly wrong about all kinds of things, and yet you can be lovable and have hope for the future. Like, you still have a seat at the table, right? Even if you have all the wrong opinions, you'll just get laughed at. And maybe that's appropriate, you know? But it's like, but you don't get, no one's like sort of excommunicated in the context of the story, right? Like, all the heretics are all there, you know, and all the mistakes are everything's out on the table and everyone is still there.
And even the way that the N word is used in this passage is an excellent example of that, because it's introduced as the statement of someone who is racist in a way that Moore isn't. Like, there's a contrast there between Moon Mullins and Moore.
Right.
But what's happening there when Moore uses the word, he doesn't surrender his moral difference from Moon Mullins. What he's doing is interrogating this conflict, because what happens is, in a world where you're actually in contact with humans who have different values than you, but you have to share a kind of vocabulary. You know, using a word doesn't condemn you to the sameness of opinion of someone else who uses it. The words have to circulate in an economy where everyone who uses them is not the same. And that's why having this, like, we have this crazy, you know, I'm not going to say the word because we live in that world. I'm going to say the word in the context of the passage because I don't believe in censorship. But when ideology takes over, like, the novel is showing you what a non-ideological approach to the use of language can do.
Right.
It can shade it, right? It becomes a commentary on the difference of opinion, you know?
Right.
There's so much more subtlety to that.
Yeah. And Moore couldn't conjure the sort of the horrific failure of the test and the evil of that time in history and of that world without using that word, right? Because that word itself is a condensation of so much that was wrong, right? And if you just don't say the word, then you can't conjure in your imagination that world and all the things that were wrong. And you need to feel in your gut that it was wrong. And this is why all of us have that nausea with the word, is because of the wrongness. That means that at times it has to be said.
What I love about this passage is that there was no sense that banning the word would solve the problem.
Oh, of course not.
There was no sense that there was
stupid.
there was no sense that there was a need to ban the word, in the sense that, like, it's not the word that's doing the damage here.
No. The word represents
the
a
whole
host of other things that are the damage.
And so we can see this. What I think are the shortcomings of our own approach.
Just cut the word and you'll fix it.
And there's horrible cancellation stories related to the quote unquote N-word. Anyway.
So back somewhat to the quote. I want to settle for a minute on his opening question. Is it even possible that from the beginning, America, never did work? That the thing always had a flaw in it, a place where it would shear, and that all this time we were not really different from Ecuador and Bosnia-Herzegovina, just richer? And I love this question about American exceptionalism. Like, I don't even know that it needs an answer to have a good effect. I think just the asking of it is enough, because it holds humility and hope in the same moment. And in some ways, it's really a question about humanity in general, like as created in God's image but fallen. You know, the corruption of the best is the worst, like we always say here. So the main character, Tommy Moore, is asking this about America in general, but he's also always, throughout the novel, asking it about himself. Like, am I fundamentally flawed? Was I always doomed to fall apart and become a lonesome, womanizing, alcoholic psych ward patient with delusions of grandeur who wants to win the Nobel Prize? You know, am I really just as messed up as everyone else? And the answer to this question on the personal level is, yeah, you are fundamentally flawed. You know, and the solution for him is he needs to go to confession, you know, which he's been putting it off for a decade because he's never really felt sorry enough for his sins for the priest to be able to absolve him. And he never stops believing in God or being a Catholic. He's just a bad, unshriven Catholic, you know, until the very end of the story when he finally goes to confession on Christmas Eve. But the question about the country is kind of the same thing as the question about himself, I think.
It's also true the other way around. Like, unshriven Tommy Moore represents an America that sees how messed up it is, but can't seem to do anything about it. Maybe it's not a question of doing something logistical or technocratic. Like, maybe we don't need a solution. Maybe we don't need, you know, the ideological dogmas of, you know, the 1619 Project that say, you know, this is history. You're on the right side. You're on the wrong side. Maybe we need something that centers mercy more. And I think that's sort of the hidden context of this Black Man as a Test. You know, chattel slavery as practiced in America was generally cruel, often savage, and always deeply unethical. And it was recognized as such and battled against until it was ended. So that is a story with a moral arc. But the clarity of that moral arc does and should not simplify the conflict or any person on either side of it. This is what humans do. They live and they also reflect on the way they live in society. They fight over territory and resources and ideas. And to acknowledge this with grace, as you put it earlier, is really powerful. You know, we're arguing that it is formative, right? This is why we want people to read novels and not just read articles like the 1619 Project in the Times Magazine, right? You know, we don't want to reduce these theories to right side of history discussions. We don't want to simplify. And I think that the reason we don't want to simplify is because you can't build a moral society on the ideology that all human relationships are reducible to power structures. Like, this is an idea that came out of, you know, post-Nietzschean, God is dead, will to power kind of philosophical environment. And I think it's like a shitty idea. And I think we're living now with 20, 40 years of the acknowledgement that it is a shitty idea. It's a really understandable urge, right? And I think that's a lot of what's going on in this passage. Like, we want to find simple explanations. That's totally human, totally normal. We want easy answers to human imperfection. And, you know, and this is important because I think assigning blame is one way you get out of the harder task of repentance, right? Moore, like so many people, he can see that path on which simplifying the test of history to pass fail, even if it means he takes the fail or the fall on himself, like that's somehow more palatable in some way than actually personally changing. It's harder to confess one's own sins than it is to blame other people for the state of the world. The reason this is so important is because it's only by changing yourself, changing that mindset, that the world does change. The only person we can change with the help of grace, human and heavenly, is ourselves. So politics of blame is always going to fail because it's it's just basically a politics of blame in action looks like not meeting people as people.
I definitely think the idea that the black man is a test is a Judeo-Christian idea. Like the two Bible stories it's drawing from are, first, obviously, the Genesis story of Adam and Eve in paradise. Haha, paradise, right? And, God gives them everything at their fingertips, and he just withholds this one tree from them. But the one thing that they're not supposed to have, the forbidden fruit, is exactly what they take because they think it'll make them powerful, right? And then everything falls apart as a consequence of that, and they go into exile. So Percy's obviously, drawing on that idea. And then again, in the stories of the Israelites in Exodus, right? They were slaves in Egypt, and then God rescues them and pulls them out of slavery and promises to give them this new land beyond the Jordan, which God says, the current inhabitants are going to lose it because they've been violent and depraved in how they treat each other. And so the condition of God giving this new land to the Israelites is don't treat each other like slaves. Like, don't mistreat the foreigner. Don't take advantage of others for the sake of greed and exploitation. And if you do, the land is going to vomit you out and you'll be punished and go into exile, just like Adam and Eve.
Yeah, I just read Exodus 20, actually, as part of my Read the Bible in a Year commitment thing. And that's where the 10 words, or what's commonly called the 10 Commandments, actually appear. And right after that, there's a section that deals with specific laws that are sort of related to the 10 Commandments, including laws on how to treat your slaves. It was like
deeply ironic. Wait a minute.
Very on point, right? I mean, you're talking about rules for slavery among newly freed slaves. I mean, of course, this isn't chattel slavery and it's not racialized.
Right.
It's more what we would probably think of as indentured servitude. But it's really important to note that, that wasn't questioned as an institution. And I think we miss or overlook a lot of those things because we're not comfortable with authority. Yahweh brings the Israelites out of the desert so they can be slaves to him.
Right.
Like they can be
a new master.
New master.
It's not no master. It's new master.
The issue here is not equality or rights. The issue here is mercy and obedience to God-given limits. So
exactly.
That's just important to say because otherwise, you lose that nuance.
Mm-hmm. They're drawing on not just Adam and Eve, not just the Exodus, but then also the Gospels, where you've got Christ's Sermon on the Mount, where he says, the meek shall inherit the earth, and also his parable about how the first shall be last and the last shall be first, which is the language that Percy's directly drawing on. So I'm going to reread the section of that quote again as a refresher and just respond to it. He says, "Hasn't it always been that ever since the first tough, God-believing, Christ-haunted, cunning, violent, rapacious, Visigoth Western Gentile first set foot here with the first black man, the one willing to risk everything, take all or lose all, the other willing to just wait and outlast because once he was violated, all he had to do was wait, because sooner or later, the first would wake up and know that he had flunked, had proved a liar where he lived, and no man can live with that. And sooner or later, the lordly Visigoth Western Gentile Christian Americans would have to falter, fall out, turn upon themselves like scorpions in a bottle." So I think the scorpions in a bottle is probably referencing the Civil War as a religious war, since half the country realized that they had flunked sooner than the other half realized it. And the Civil War was Christians fighting against Christians, both using the same exact scriptures, to justify themselves, or I should say different parts of the scriptures, interpreted in particular ways to say, we're really the right ones here. We're really the good ones here. And since Percy wrote this in the late 60s, during the civil rights movement, I'm sure that was also front and center in his mind too. And Martin Luther King's movement was one of nonviolent protest, and it was a deeply Christian protest movement. And in their nonviolence, they were living out this Christian intuition that the meek will inherit the earth, that, in Percy's words, they just needed to wait. Right? They needed to be seen in the eyes of the Christians at home watching on their TV screens that Black Americans are being wrongfully violated. And they knew that Christian consciences would wake up and realize that they were still flunking a century after the Civil War had ended, and that's what happened. They woke up, and that's part of what brought down Jim Crow. But Percy is also prescient here in foreseeing, wokeness as the residue of the Christian conscience that knows it had failed the test in the past. And it's extremely worried that it's still failing today in ways that are either too big to be seen, which is the idea of systemic racism that's everywhere, or in ways that are too small to be seen, which is, white fragility and unconscious bias and all the talk about microaggressions, right? It's too big and it's too small. And so I see wokeness as a modern expression of the Christian conscience about flunking the test of the Black man, but it's no longer proportional to the severity of the problem. It's like an allergic reaction to a tiny allergen. Like if you're severely allergic to sesame seeds and you're exposed to this teeny amount of it, it's not the sesame that's going to kill you. It's your body's extreme overreaction to the presence of a real but very tiny trigger. I think the past decade has shown us that, like progressive anaphylactic shock to real but trace amounts of residual racism is, I think, what wokeness is. And the allergic reaction has been worse and more dangerous than the allergen. And I'd also agree with you that, that wokeness differs from the normally functioning Christian conscience in that there is no forgiveness. There is no moral transformation. There's no reconciliation or redemptive arc. It's just pure self-flagellation and power games and virtue signaling. When what is actually called for in the Christian story is communion and brotherhood. Like, what are you supposed to do after you morally flunk? And you for sure have morally flunked. You repent, right? You try to make amends, and then you restore the relationship. It's all about coming back together. And this is what every parent knows, and which is why it's important that we think of God as our Father and us as His children, right? Like when your kids are fighting, you don't want to excommunicate one from the family and then have one kid left. It's like, no, you want the brothers to reconcile. You want the one who did the bad thing to genuinely feel sorry and to say it and then be forgiven, and then for the two of them to run off and start playing again. Like what you want is for dinner to be able to keep going forward. What you want is to have a tomorrow where they're playing together again. That is the whole point. It's not to blame and find the bad person and kick them out. It's to bring moral transformation so the relationship is restored. That's the point.
Right, because there's already a knowledge that no one is going anywhere.
That's right. We're all in this together. No one's going.
Right.
That's right. Because you're stuck in the same house together. So you got to learn to get along.
You're stuck in the same country together.
Yeah.
There is a sort of, and that's why that distancing language, like the temptation around this language about, the helpless man in Africa is, that's the danger there.
Yes.
Because you don't want to sort of categorically set people apart. And I mean, because the real, what makes the fight against slavery plausible is this idea that Africans could become Americans, that they sort of were Americans already. They were Americans being denied the same rights. They were seen that way. It doesn't make sense. You can't enfranchise someone that you don't see as your equal on those terms. In the same way that pagans could become Christians. It's that same ethos of, not separating, of not setting someone apart and saying these people are categorically different. And that's the danger. That's what happens with the woke approach. There's this odd sort of similarity that if people who defended chattel slavery, one of the justifications they used was to say, Black people are fundamentally different. They're a different kind of human or not a human, like that very, dehumanizing discourse. Right. But, you can do the same thing. Like that reductive fetishistic instinct can work in a malicious as well as a charitable manifestation. To say Black people are always victims because of whiteness is to perform a same kind of reduction. Right. What you're doing is saying this other person does not have my same moral status. Right. Canada has laws now that have to take into account people's ethnic background when they do sentencing for crimes. Really? To say that, this is a real thing.
What?
Like to say that someone of color can't be punished in the same way as someone who's white is basically
just to give them a different moral status.
Exactly.
Which is what the South had been doing.
Which is wrong. So you see how the whole thing,
it's like
weird, right?
It's so opposite. It comes around full circle and then becomes the same.
Because it's the same instinct, right? The woke form of this, it comes from this idea that moral relationships are not formed in the way that the Judeo-Christian inheritance would instruct you that they're formed, that humans can know things about the moral appropriateness of their own society. Like there are moral limits that pre-exist us. And the way that the Judeo-Christian story tells that story, saying these are the laws that our God has given us. These are the rules. And
they come down
didn't make them up.
To
they
us
come down
from the mountain.
They come down to us. We know they are real because there's a sense of authority that we don't create. And power structure theory is the opposite. It says that basically everything is just everything comes from the way that people relate. And the dynamic between them is solely always about power. It's a totally opposite understanding of where morality comes from.
Yeah.
And I think that, power structures are a kind of cheap grace. because they let you out of the messy business of correcting moral errors through moral redemption. So like that's why the civil rights movement in its original manifestation was so powerful, because you saw at the forefront this Christian willingness to demand justice with the promise of mercy.
Yeah.
Downstream from that came Black Power, the politicization of racial guilt. And now a lot of elite institutions, we've seen examples of discrimination against whites as anti-racism. But like, that's not mercy.
Right.
It's really sad, honestly, on some level, because, you know, you can have your fetish or you can have the possibility of moral communion.
Right.
But you can't have both.
That's right.
All right. So let's talk more about Moore's messy redemption. To answer that question, where is that bed? We're at Christmas at home 5 years later. Where is the bed? Moore and his wife and 2 kids live in a place called the Quarters, which earlier in the novel were described as such.
A long row house, a ruin of soft, warm brick, which housed sugar plantation slaves, and which, set just above the water level of the bayou, was thought of by the Paradise developers as a kind of Natchez under the hill, and so restored and re-roofed for domestic servants, even a chapel added, so that the strains of good old spirituals would come floating up to our patios in the evening, but the domestic preferred their hollow, dark and fetid though it was. So back to the jungle went the Quarters, new tin roof and all.
Sometimes I couldn't even believe that this book was written so long ago, because there's so many elements of what we still deal with in our own political discourse about, you know, improvement, utopianism. Natchez under the Hill refers to a historic, formerly in fact infamous riverfront district located below the bluffs along the Mississippi River in Natchez, Mississippi. I think it's standing in here, you know, for a blighted area in need of redevelopment. Like so many top-down visions of progress, you know, this rehabilitation of slave quarters didn't take, right?
They don't want to live there.
Right.
I wonder why.
Well, right. And because it's not just about the new roof, it's about the whole setup, right?
Yeah.
You know, the domestics preferred their own place of old because it was theirs.
Yeah,
They didn't want
exactly.
a new no place,
Uh-huh.
especially perhaps one with those historical echoes, right?
Exactly.
But of course, now Moore and his wife live there because, you know, there's been local disruptions. And, you know, this is sort of as part of the epilogue, you know, you get these allusions to this event called the Troubles, which apparently is some sort of local violent conflict that emerged on that fateful July 4 day due to this chemical event that made people crazy. Again, like you're really going to have to read the book to really understand the full context of this. But after that, a new stability emerged. And you didn't get a revolution. What you got was people voting with their feet and their pocketbooks.
Yep.
The Bantus, the violent black separatists, ended up with legal rights to the swamplands because they'd been squatting in them so long. So they actually got rich when oil was found there. And so they just bought all the houses in Paradise
Yeah, they
Estates.
get it legit. Yeah.
And ironically, the only white person remaining in the development is Moore's mom, who, quote, stayed and made a second fortune selling astrological real estate to the Bantus, who are as superstitious as the whites. So we have change, but not revolution. Reversals, but not some happily ever after notion of perfect justice.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, my favorite scene in the entire book is the Christmas encounter between Moore and super Negro turned super Bantu, Collie Wilkes. Wilkes appeared in the novel before. He worked with Moore at the hospital, where Moore does his first work on his lapsometer.
And Wilkes is a doctor, right? Or a psychologist.
I think
Psychiatrist.
he's described like as a sort of factotum, kind of a Leonardo type.
Okay.
Like
right.
he's really
so good at
knowledgeable.
everything. He's super smart.
And apparently he's gone Bantu. So in this passage, in this encounter, we discover that the Bantus now do the same to whites of Paradise as was the reverse. You know, they racially discriminate.
Collie asks politely after my family, my practice. I tell him my family's well, but my practice is poor. So poor, I have to moonlight with a fat clinic. At noon today, in fact, I meet with my fat ladies at the Bantu Country Club. Fran, Wilkes' wife, shakes her head with an outrage tempered by her binocular polishing. I don't get it, Tom, says Fran, breathing now on the telephoto lens, which is the size of a butter plate. Everyone knows you're a marvelous diagnostician. Well, it's very simple, really, I reply. The local Bantu Medical Society won't let me in, so I can't use the hospital. An awkward silence follows. Well, says Collie presently, Rome wasn't built in a day. That's true. These things take time, Tom, says Fran. I know. Rest assured, however, some of us are working on it. All right. You got to remember one thing, says Kali. You can accomplish more by not rocking the boat. I wasn't rocking the boat. You asked me a question. You're among friends, Tom, says Fran. Who do you think led the fight to integrate the Bantu Audubon Society? Kali. Right. Kali lifts his chin toward me. And who do you think fixed 100 Christmas baskets for Peckerwood children? Fran. Longhub baskets, dear, Fran corrects him. Longhub is the Bantu god of the winter solstice.
So this is a very fine satire, complete with Percy's own invented Bantu god there. This is what highly imaginative fiction can do. It has options that nonfiction just doesn't have. You know, in fiction, the seriousness of America's long struggle to live up to the prima facie meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal, can be made into a kind of comedy where two people who know one another pretty well encounter each other in a new world and react as most humans do, humanely and imperfectly.
Yeah.
So here we have the well-meaning palliatives that were deployed in the long civil rights struggle redeployed with the shoe on the other foot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a genius stroke, really, because the reversal forces you to see the nuance beyond the ideological platitudes about oppressors and victims.
Yeah.
It's like power is too simple a lens to look at this.
That's right. That's right. And certainly in this situation with the three of them talking, there's history between them. And there's also like affection and not wanting to offend. And the fact that they have a history and that they do actually kind of care about one another, it creates both an awkwardness and a tenderness and a weirdness to it.
Well,
there's tension, but it doesn't blow up.
and it's the reversal also implies that, you know, the fact that whites didn't always take the moral high ground. Here, now that it's reversed, you get to have that thought that blacks won't always take the moral high ground, because part of this passage is really ambiguous. You can't really tell if he's turned into a super Bantu,
which is kind of like a black power type of approach.
Like if he's gone to the side of people who are in the game of discriminating, how much do you really believe that he's actually working to end that?
Is the talk of integration, is that him doing virtue signaling, or does he actually really care? You know, right? It's like,
exactly.
Like
I think there's
you don't get to be in his head, so you don't know.
There's a lot of ambiguity here, because I mean, the original context of the satire is like, was every person involved in civil rights who claimed to be on the right side of history, you know, where were their real allegiances? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. It's ambiguous because it's human.
Yes. Yeah. And they're all human. Yeah. And that's the point. It's a clever scene. And like you're saying earlier, it's timely for us because plenty of people on the right have been complaining about the idea of reverse discrimination now. Like we both read various articles describing how now it's white men who are being discriminated against for job hiring because of racial and sexual quotas. Like particularly that article in Compact Magazine on the Lost Generation by Jacob Savage.
Pretty viral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know if that kind and degree of discrimination is true on a broad scale. I think it's pretty much just limited to like white collar professional millennials in certain fields, like journalism and Hollywood, publishing and that kind of thing. But however widespread it is or it isn't, plenty of conservatives fear and feel that it is a big problem. So it's certainly at least a problem. I'm just not exactly sure how big it is, but so in this imagined scene in Love in the Ruins between, you know, this sort of newly upper crust black couple and the newly down and out Moor, you know, we get to see how the first acts when he's now in the position of the last.
Right. I mean, that's literally all that they've done is just swap the races of the characters in the
right.
I mean,
but the words are the same.
Like Peckerwood there is like the opposite of the N-word.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
That's
it's
what
the derogative, you know, like, paternalistic word or whatever for
the
little white children.
Be more, there's a lot of ellipses in that quote because it's very long and it would just make it longer. But I mean, it's just, there is like an obvious element, like they're bird watching, well, it's fancy equipment. I mean, it couldn't get more white coded.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
They're listening
it's
to
the
sort
country
of greatest
club.
hits of classical music.
Yeah.
I mean, all that he's doing is he's swapping the races and saying, what does this look like from the other side?
Exactly. Yeah. What's interesting about it is because, you know, we're always in Moor's head. So we're following how he feels. And what I love most about Moor in this moment is that we learn that he's actually not bitter. He's not angry or resentful. He just kind of gets on with life.
Right. But do you see how much of a challenge that represents if you reflip?
Yes. And you see, to me, like it struck me as this enormous, like an enormous display of virtue, that he was just able to kind of, for all of his problems, just be like, what the hell? I'm, going to the fat clinic to help the ladies. Like he's able to not care. Like he's not chewed up inside. He's not like, drinking. What is that called? The envy is like this poison. You drink it and then you wait for your enemy to die, but like it's killing you,
Yeah.
It's like he doesn't drink it. He's not envious. He's not eaten up inside.
And
he just moves on,
and
which is like,
and Percy knows that
impossible.
so much of race relations at the time that he's writing about, that's what Black people are doing. They're just getting on.
Right. And you realize when the situation is flipped, how astounding an achievement that is.
But
on a moral
also,
level.
but
To
then
be able, there's a forgiveness in it. There's just like a blanket grace in it,
right,
and a strength in it that's astounding.
But then you realize also that the just getting on with it takes away the power of using it forever as a cudgel to make victims out of.
That's
and
right.
Make,
right.
Mercy has
it's like
this thing
you can't get to me because I already forgave you.
But that's the thing. Like if you put mercy into politics, it takes away some things that people really like, which is cudgels. So
the cruelty of it.
Yeah, they can have power because they can say you're bad, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad.
Right. Right.
No, it's. I guess we might want to say that because we know historically that that Percy was very much in favor of civil rights, but I think he rejected this. The novel seems to make clear that he rejected this sort of oversimplification.
If we keep kind of following what Moore does after he gets out of this car ride with them, he goes to, the fat clinic, which is basically like a Weight Watchers, where he's encouraging these wealthy, obese Black women to lose a few pounds. And they meet at the country club, right? And then these wealthy Black women are kind of giving him extra generous tips to help him out.
Before it would
so
have been
poor.
the reverse.
Right. So
although I guess not quite because, well, I don't know.
But they have scenes earlier in the book where, before the tables are flipped and Moore is at the country club and he's giving tips at Christmas time to the Black waiter who lives on the tips, right? And now he's the poor white guy amidst all the Black people at the country club and he's living on the tips, right?
So it's a reversal, but a nuanced reversal.
But it's just so interesting because he's in that situation, but he's able to live in gratitude and in this kind of companionable goodwill with the people around him. And he chooses to stay in his hometown, even though now he's the bottom of the barrel. And he's just not consumed with himself and his own downward status. And I think primarily it's because he's just happy to be sober, finally. And he's happy to be married to a good woman who loves him well and who's given him, children and a happy home and lots of great sex, which is pretty important to him. And I want to add, this is, his home life now is especially consoling because we find out, over the course of the novel that his drinking and womanizing is because of, what the kids these days would call a trauma response. Because he'd had a family before, but his only child died of cancer, and then his marriage fell apart, and then his wife left him for a gay man, and then she died, and so he was just all alone and totally a wreck. All by himself and drinking like vodkas mixed with duck eggs and Tang every day. And, he was just a complete wreck. So he's learned to appreciate the most basic things, like having someone to love, having a home to go back to with good meals and, and a loving wife and children. And so the status game just becomes irrelevant at that point. So Moore has time to read books and he likes to watch the birds outside of his window. And he just has this simplicity about him. I'll read a little quote. He says, "Poor as I am, I feel like God's spoiled child. I am Robinson Crusoe, set down on the best possible island with a library, a laboratory, a lusty Presbyterian wife, a cozy treehouse, an idea, and all the time in the world." And so it's that kind of simplicity and gratitude and this kind of easygoing, like local focus that prevents him from being a political extremist or an ideologue. And that is what makes him so wonderful and lovable.
Right. It's the victory you can claim without needing the world to be fixed.
Exactly. That's right. He finds a form of contentment and happiness and joy without the world being fixed.
It's such an interesting commentary on the politics of the whole novel, really, because ultimately we see that what matters to Moore is that there is peace in his neck of the woods. Like,
Yeah.
so again, as I was saying before, it's not a coincidence that his, was America ever workable? Was it always about chattel slavery?
Mm-hmm.
That anxiety is set in the moment of extreme physical danger that he's going to, die.
Right.
And now when there's peace in his neck of the woods, all of those political concerns are not that pressing.
It's not salient.
It's
now.
not salient anymore. Like, is it ideal that the Bantus now discriminate against whites? Nah, I wouldn't say so. But that's the whole point. You have to live and worship and die in an imperfect world.
Yep.
You can't wait for things to be. Percy's trying to paint the sort of polarization of America in this novel as sort of a missed opportunity. At the same time, there are things wrong, but also if you just consume yourself with political agitation, you never do get to the living part.
That's right. The point is to live.
And what motivates people to keep on keeping on in the midst of imperfection really is, at least this novel suggests, to be an attachment to place.
Yeah.
The faith in local people and local conditions. That's totally core to the optimism of this novel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really actually kind of interesting because, Percy, with all his emphasis on decline and decay in this imaginary 80s, not even he really imagined a world where locality has been so degraded, so homogenized, right? We may recognize the intense polarization that he describes.
Mm-hmm.
He describes it as the parties were so polarized they lost their names. Like, that hasn't happened to us, but like the parties themselves have definitely... the extreme wings of both parties that now seem to sort of dominate the discourse. Like, we could give them new names because they don't resemble the Republican or Democratic parties of before.
That's right.
So Percy still imagines the extreme camps as having their own places. Like each the knotheads and the left both have their own cities. This really represents, unfortunately, an older political geography that really does seem dated.
Yeah.
Like, when you say like blue and red states, we should be so lucky because now we have urban, rural,
blue
left,
cities,
right divide. Like, it doesn't. You can have a very blue city in the middle of a super red state.
That's where we live.
And there's a certain dissatisfaction to that. It's almost as if even at Percy, at his worst dystopic imagination, actually couldn't get to the
how bad it was.
How bad it is. Like, the idea that you could like move to San Diego because that would be a totally conservative city. Like,
nope.
That's really not true anymore. It is really much more urban, rural.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. There might be a lesson in that for us. The fact that the optimism of the ending of the book here relies on Moore's commitment to his local town, like to Paradise, Louisiana.
Yep.
The love of the local seems to be at the core of the possibility of recovery, both personal and to some extent political, right?
Yeah.
So Moore says about what happened in Paradise after the Troubles. Some stayed, mostly eccentrics who don't fit in anywhere else. I stayed because it's home, and I like its easygoing ways, its religious confusion, racial hodgepodge, misty green woods, and sleepy bayous. People still stop and help strangers lying in ditches having been set upon by thieves, or just plain drunk. Good nature usually prevails, even between enemies. As the saying goes in Louisiana, you may be a son of a bitch, but you're my son of a bitch.
So great. That's perfect.
So
that's
this
what we
is
need.
So now you really see how the sort of black man is a test attitude in his sort of moment of peril, his sort of like, oh my God, the sky's falling, we've done it all wrong. And certainly that moral arc of the defeat of slavery, is real and important. But what's also important is within that, the simple ethic of the Gospel's Good Samaritan. I mean, can you imagine, speaking of, not reading the Bible, like, if you hadn't read the Bible, you're not going to get the lying in the ditch part, are you?
That's right. Yeah,
right?
That's it. That should be immediate code to conjure. Oh, yeah, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Da, da,
right.
Da, da. Yeah, but if you don't know it, you don't know it.
Right. You help the person in the ditch because you feel that call, because the stranger is yours.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, you don't want to cling too hard to those narratives, as important as they are. You don't want to lose the fact that the ethic of the Good Samaritan can coexist with inequality and discrimination, because it's not based on notions of historical progress or arriving at, a utopic society. It's small scale, it's personal, it's local, and it's always available.
Right. It's an encounter, like you're talking about earlier. It's an encounter. It's not like a big idea turned into a system.
We've never been great at those big moral changes, right? I mean, Like you can have a world where people pull each other out of ditches, even if they don't agree with each other, because people are not 2-dimensional.
Right.
They're 3-dimensional. Like we keep going back to this idea that there's a difference between seeing someone in a ditch because you see their body.
Exactly. You see
Like-
their body. Yeah.
Yeah. I think on some level we've forgotten that people aren't just what their political attitudes are. We've never been great at this. I mean, human history is a history of conflict, like full stop. But, social media is basically monetizing now this perpetuation of or promotion of the idea that, you're just your opinion. So get with the right side, put this square on your Insta or whatever, This was a fun passage, right? When he describes the role of culture in the polarization. And this feels a little too close to now. And remember, late 60s, he's writing this. Very prescient. You want to read it for us?
I've stopped going to the movies. It's hard to say which is more unendurable, the sentimental blasphemy of knothead movies like The Sound of Music, or sitting in a theater with strangers watching other strangers engage in sexual intercourse and sodomy on the giant 3D Panavision screen. American literature is not having its finest hour. The Southern Gothic novel yielded to the Jewish masturbatory novel, which in turn gave way to the WASP homosexual novel, which has nearly run its course. The Catholic literary renaissance, long awaited, failed to materialize.
So we can recognize, right, our own era in Percy's imagination, even though he's writing many decades ago now. I mean, the contours of our own predicament are right there, right? On the one hand, a facile grasping for some imaginary golden age of moral simplicity, represented here by The Sound of Music. And then at the other, the dumpster fire at the end of the cul-de-sac of the sexual revolution. And I mean, if the homosexual novel has nearly run its course, we absolutely know now what came after, right? Everything's queer now. And it's funny, though, because the one thing that all these dystopias seem to not predict is the fact that the screens of, this dumpster fire are not bigger, but smaller.
Smaller in your pocket all the time.
That's true in Fahrenheit 451.
That's right.
It's true in Brave New World. Yeah. They were thinking it would be bigger.
Bigger and bigger. But it's actually making it smaller and
smaller.
more intimate and more private, makes it more constant and more lonely. Yeah, he's completely right here about the degradation of literature, like particularly of popular novels, into queer youth fests and young adult books, and in pure smut for women, basically printed and verbal as opposed to digital porn for women, also called romantasy. I'll link in the show notes this great breakdown on YouTube called The Absolute Degeneracy of Modern Writing that's all about the problems within so-called women's lit today. It's a great analysis. But aside from that, it's also hilarious here that, in Love in the Ruins, a Catholic novel about a bad Catholic at the end of the world, Walker Percy is saying, the Catholic literary renaissance failed to materialize, right? So everyone gets skewered in the book, even himself, right?
Yeah.
He's criticizing the failure of Catholic literature as he's writing Catholic literature.
Right. It's an odd pessimism, right? Because he doesn't want us to believe in progress, but he wants us to believe in redemption. Because at the end of the novel, nothing on the national scale has really changed. Like it really is that sort of, the world is ending, but the world doesn't end.
Yeah.
America's stumbling on, still polarizing. Moore's life, on the other hand, really is a total change, a total improvement, shall we say, right? It's not a change that you would call progress because it doesn't reflect the political righting of wrongs. It doesn't participate in a moral arc of history. It's almost sort of independent. Yeah. It's gone independent of it.
Yeah.
It's important because there's peace, but other than that, I think Percy's really satirizing the idea of progress on a large scale. And Moore it's not that Moore has no relationship to progress. In fact, he kind of is a figure of redemption who has this naive belief in progress, but it's like abstract enough that it like doesn't harm him. Because, he takes the money from the sale of his house and he pours it into more research on his lepsometer.
Right. Right, which is just kind of fun. It almost seems like funny tinkering. It's a little bit of the mad scientist about him, but he's not putting it onto people anymore the way he was really, in a sense, trying to be the change. I think he kind of learned, like, I should be careful about that. I don't think I should do that to other people,
There is a little bit of ambiguity there, right? Because, he's a mad scientist who dreams of reversing the fall. Just in that very statement, it comes to have this abstract quality rather than a revolutionary quality.
That's right. It's too absurd. And he's too busy with his wife and kids and making money.
Right.
Like he's just making ends meet. And that, in a sense, his poverty is and his family or his salvation, that they keep him from thinking that he could save everybody.
Right. Because day to day, he's prioritizing the peace that he's found in his restored faith, his second chance family, which, because he's Catholic, the first wife had to die.
Yeah, that's right. Otherwise, he
right?
couldn't have gotten remarried. Yeah.
Exactly. He's actually really lucky to have this path to redemption that really doesn't have anything to do with progress. There really is a sort of fundamental kind of important lesson there. It's not that you can't dream of a better world. It's just that you have to live in the world as it is.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yes.
Moore tells us that the fictional Pope John the 24th has revived public penance as a kind of, sacrament that was sort of pushed to the side in Vatican II, which would have been basically
just happened
culturally a minute, a short, hot minute before he's actually writing this, right?
Yeah.
So when Moore goes to his Christmas Eve confession, the priest slips him a sackcloth and some ashes. So Moore puts on this sort of, penitential kind of, you can imagine it almost like a sort of, temporary garment. You just take it out of his plastic pouch.
Yeah, exactly. Like a little rain poncho or something,
Yes.
ripping it out and sticking it on.
And a little thing of ashes that he can just
sprinkle on top.
So you see here that change is one person, one act at a time. It's very anti-ideological in a sense because ideologies never come around.
Right. And being able to stay in place with the people that are there is a sign of coming round. And the escape of I'm just going to go be where all the people are who are just like me, I think is shown to be a moral failure.
Politics is always vulnerable to ideology, but at the same time, people are always going to have this urge to start over, to build coalitions. And so you get this scene from the epilogue where Victor Charles, who is the Black man and former servant of Moore and his mother, asks Moore to be his campaign manager because he's going to run for Congress as a Democrat. But it's he's going to revive, because at this point the Democrats don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
He's going to revive the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Extremes are not stable, but coalitions of the willing often are. And so this is how, when Moore asks why, Victor wants him to do this, Victor says, I got the Bantu vote. They've fallen out with each other and are willing to go with me. Chuck Parker's helping me with the swamp people. Max is working on the liberals. Leroy Ledbetter's got the Peckerwoods. You could swing the Catholics. So, it's the same old funny fouled up coalition is Moore's response. There's always going to be some people who are just non-ideological by their temperament.
Yeah.
And they come together to form these coalitions. I mean, really, what can humans do beside begin again?
Yeah.
Right. And here Moore is beginning again. The best image, really, right, is there he is barbecuing in his sackcloth.
Yeah. He's getting on with it.
I mean, that's an image for the ages, right?
Yeah.
A kind of Catholic optimism, if you will, right? And a distinctly American guise, barbecuing in my sackcloth.
Yeah.
I'm going to cross-stitch that onto a pillow.
Barbecuing in the sackcloth. Yeah, and his dialogue with the priest in the confession is just hilarious. It's delightful. And yeah, the book is definitely optimistic at the end, even though that national scale polarization is continuing. And the optimism is rooted in that beautiful gift that confession, that the sackcloth and the ashes and the barbecue gives to someone like Moore, which I think of as amused tolerance. He likes living around eccentrics who don't fit in. He likes the racial hodgepodge and the religious confusion where you treat your enemies kindly because they're your enemies. They're your sons of bitches. And there's this loyalty to a place that allows Moore to forgive everyone in his vicinity simply because they're in the vicinity. Like we were saying earlier about brothers getting along in the house because you're all stuck in the same house. So you make do, you make it work because you're together. And it's that genius of tolerance as it's meant to be, not tolerance of vice or the celebration of vice, but tolerance of human particularities and flaws. And it's rooted in humor and grace and loyalty to the place. And I just find that really encouraging, personally. I live in a town that's a whole lot bluer and more liberal than I am, but I come from a blue-collar part of Connecticut that's a whole lot redder and more conservative than I am. And I have a love for both places and a loyalty to both places. And like you said earlier, people are just not the same as their ideological beliefs, and there's always more to them than that. And by poking fun at the caricatures of the ideologies, I think it really lets the person and all of their lovable idiosyncrasy shine through. And that's a gift that this book has given me, a reminder that the ability to see the flaws in other people is an invitation first to laugh at them and then to love them and to forgive them. And I would love to see more American satire in the vein of what Walker Percy was doing here. I haven't actually read the book Erasure by Percival Everett or seen the movie that's based on it, American Fiction, starring Jeffrey Wright. But when I was like racking my brain to think of something modern that in any way approximates like the satire of Love in the Ruins, I wondered if this story would do it. In American Fiction, an African-American novelist and professor is frustrated because his high-quality books don't sell, and his publishers reject his most recent book because it's quote-unquote not Black enough. So as a joke, he writes this over-the-top satire within the stereotypical Black book genre with like ghetto-style Black vernacular ebonics, that kind of thing, only to have it be mistaken for serious literature. And he gets all this praise and like high book sales and tons of money from it, even though no one was reading his thoughtful, genuine work from before. And like all the white liberal ladies just eat up this stupid joke novel for breakfast and they think it's amazing. So that story combines a critique of the corruption of literature into something else, with this weird fetishizing of race by showing how readers crave a Black stereotype over and above the actual Black individual who in their uniqueness is like surprising and is a person with his own thoughts.
That's actually a good comparison. The movie was really good. Absolutely do
I
watch
see it.
I haven't read the book either, but I guess put it on the list, right? I mean, that's a good question. How do we get back to amused tolerance other than just having conversations with people in real life? I mean, I really think the takeaway is good novels show us real people, and a life where you reduce the amount of encounters you have with ideas separated from people, like scrolling, the more your life will resemble that moral subtlety and nuance and charity and kindness of the novel.
Yes.
Maybe what's going on here is that, your most frequent thought is determining your most present reality. So the more and more we scroll, the more and more our novels, reflect the polarization in those worlds. Like, it would be interesting to read the book because, if the white liberal ladies, do they really like the book, or are they liking it because that's the way they have to earn their social credit?
Right.
Do they have the option to relate authentically, not based on these these stereotypes that they're expected to conform to? So we sort of come back for full circle now, right? Like, if the golden age of the reader is over, maybe the renaissance of the novel depends on, recognizing the need for the thing that Percy's telling us we need in this novel. Like, maybe this specific kind of moral thirst for nuance, for compassion, for amused tolerance. Maybe that's how we get renewed interest in the genre created to promote it, the novel. Like, maybe someone will write a novel that will make people realize that what they're missing is the novel and the thing the novel's trying to get you at.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there is hope. I don't know.
So our takeaway is
read novels.
Read novels.
Read this novel.
Read this novel and talk with people in person. So when in doubt, make someone a sandwich. That's my go-to.
All right. Okay. On that note, I'm kind of hungry. All right, go get yourself a sandwich. That's what we're going to go do.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. See you next time. Do your homework.